believe that we've gone live now. First of all, apologies. We had a last-minute technical hitch, but hopefully you're all able to join us tonight. First of all, I'm Tony Pritchard, and I'm an ISTD fellow and co-opted board member of the Society, and I'll be your host for tonight. I was actually just leafing through this this Royal College of Art catalog in 1987, and it's featuring one of our guests tonight, Andy Altman, and quite a few notable names that year. People like Andrew Haslam and Sean Perkins, Sarah Temple, who I knew as a former colleague at London College of Communication. And so I just booked that now with another little piece of work from 1990s. And this is by Jane Harper and Lucian Roberts, Sands and Baum, another one of our guests tonight. So welcome to, so what exactly is it that you do and why? A question any one of us might ask ourselves, whether just starting out or at a later stage in our professional life. I mean, hopefully we've got new members that have passed the student assessment scheme recently, and you might be thinking about your design skills and how you can use them with positive impact on the world, questioning what you're doing and why. So we hope this is going to be a thought-provoking evening in the company of our recent honorary fellows, Lucian Roberts, Jim Northover, and Andy Altman, and they're going to explore this question, confronting their professional motivations and hopefully offering insights into their practice. This isn't intended to be a regular portfolio walkthrough, rather a reflection on a body of work through the existential lens of questioning what we do and why we do it. So hopefully it's bringing something a little new to their iconic work. Just to mention the honorary fellowship, this is awarded in a recognition of outstanding typographic achievement or significant contribution to the society or the typographic profession as a whole. Nominations for this category are solely made by the ISTD board and must be supported by 5 fellows of more than 2 years standing. So it's quite a significant criteria to meet. Okay, I'm getting a message that I don't have YouTube open. No, I don't think I've got YouTube open. That we're getting a bit of an echo still. All I can do is maybe just quit out of. Okay, I've quit out of Safari, so I don't think I've got YouTube open. So back to the honorary fellowships, and this is quite a significant award. So and each of them have proven history within the field. So just moving on to the evening's main event. If you wish to join in the debate, then please post any thoughts and questions in the comments section on YouTube. You'll have to sign in to do this on YouTube. If asking a question, please state your name, location, and who the question is for. Or you can tweet at ISTD Worldwide, #ISTD Live. We've put that information on our social media channels. So we should be able to pick up your questions and feed them back to the panel. The session is being recorded and will be on YouTube later. So I'll just take another look, see if there's a message. Okay, so I'm going to get on to introducing our first guest. But if you can still hear me okay, here's some questions for the comment section. What year was Lloyd Northover established? It's a significant year for Jim, and hopefully he will let us know why. Which notable and distinctive typographer and educator did Andy Altman share accommodation with whilst at RCA? And there was another well-known typographer down that street, Brian Grimley, who was editor of Typographic Journal and Design Council magazine. And why did Lucy call her first company with Jane Harper Sands and Baum? So let's get our first guest out. So Lucian Roberts is founder of the graphic design studio Lucian Roberts Plus and co-founder of Publishers Graphic Design and with Rebecca Wright. She was signatory of First Things First 2000 manifesto, which called for greater design responsibility. Lucienne is International Research Fellow 2020. Okay, so we're going to hand over to Lucian Roberts. So Lucian, can you unmute? Please take the stand.
No.
And you are charged with the question, what exactly is it that you do and why?
Okay, I'm going to, can the host enable share screening, please? Is it open now? Yeah, great, okay. So, just 1 second. Hope everyone can see, hope everyone can hear, hope there's no nasty loop or anything. I'm going to sort of race through this because we're meant to do 15 minutes each. So as you say, what is it that I do and why? Well, the short answer to what do I do, I run a small design company in London called Lucian Roberts Plus, and we primarily work in exhibition design, museum sector. We produce books and we do a little bit of identity work, but mainly for the voluntary sector and arts organisations. And I am, as Tony said, co-founder of Graphic Design and with Rebecca Wright, who's a dean at CSM. And we publish books and curate exhibitions, and we consider ourselves to be an advocacy initiative. So we are advocating for what graphic design does and what graphic designers do. But the more interesting question is why. And I thought I'd start with this. This is a picture of my desk a few years ago. And on the right, you can see a picture of Woody Allen made out of wood. And he's there because I went to see him speak in the 1990s, and he described his work as a quality distraction. And what he meant was it was a distraction from the existential angst of being alive. And he hoped his work had some quality. And I would say that I identify with this idea of the existential angst. And I also, I think, consider my work as a distraction from some of that. And what I'm trying, hopefully, of course, is to produce something of quality. So why do I think about it in that way? And I suppose, I mean, part of it has to go back to my parents. My dad was a typographer and my mum was an illustrator, and I was born in the 1960s, which was a time of tremendous optimism, I think, for design. And so they kind of brought me up thinking that design can make the world a better place. And they introduced me to things like the First Things First manifesto, Ken Garland's original from 1964. And they also introduced me to modernism and modern architecture. And I now live in the Barbican, which I consider to be pretty utopian, actually. But I always say, when I talk to students, for example, that design is always political. And that's something that I hold really dear and has underpinned all my work decisions. And I don't just mean party political, although for me that has also a bearing. I mean political in the broadest sense. We, as graphic designers, are responsible for making messages travel further, and most of those messages are there to persuade some sort of behaviour change, and that might be buying something, or it might be voting a different way. But with that comes a responsibility, as does how it's made, how it's disseminated, who it's for, who it includes, who it excludes, and so on. So for me, design is absolutely a political act. And bearing that in mind, I was very influenced by the designer David King, whose work you can see on the right-hand side when I was a student. Certainly, he was political in an overt sense. But I was equally very interested by the work of people like Anthony Froschauer, who was teaching at the Central School. I went to the Central, but he was ill by the time I got there, so I was never taught by him. But I saw lots of these kind of things around, what you see on the left, which were his amazing markups and specifications. And that got me really interested in the idea of detail. So I have to say, as a result, I've become quite nerdy at points. I've also always been very interested in abstract art and colour. And so I think you'll see that in the work, and you'll see that for me, actually, a lot of abstract painting particularly is a place of some solace if we're talking about existential angst. Equally, on the right is the work of Stefan Tennyson, poet, thinker, intellectual, who I was really interested in terms of layout because of how he treated language and how he used different alignment points to bring out the meaning in words. And that's something that's always interested me, in space, how space is used. So as a student, I produced things like this. I did this with my fellow student, Tony Chambers. And this was, you know, we found this bit of typesetting that said typography's function is to convey a visual message quickly and easily. But of course, if you cut it short, you get typography's function is to convey a visual mess, to con, and it makes it fun. And that's what I mean, that I was always interested in playing with language as well as type. Another project that Tony and I did at the Central was that the comp room at the time was in a very sad state, and we were probably the only students using it. And we thought it was definitely on the way out. So we wanted to, in some way, document it. And for our final year project, this was our final year project, we printed everything in the comp room. The backs of made up forms, the knife we were using to apply colour, key, everything. When I left, I initially went to work for a feminist publisher called the Women's Press. This is one of the book covers. I then set up my own studio, and one of my main clients for a long time was Breakthrough, which was a breast cancer charity. And that really empowered me in lots of ways and made me think very hard about the good that design can do. Later, I wrote this book, Good. I'd become more and more interested in the relationship of ethics and aesthetics and philosophy and design. And most recently, in a way, in terms of sort of challenging some of the ideas about design, Rebecca and I set up Graphic Design and the idea behind this is that we publish books that always foreground that graphic design on its own isn't anything. It only matters when it's in relation to something else. So we published a book about graphic design and literature, maths, social science, religion, health and politics, and there are more in the pipeline. But most recently, not because of COVID, I've been thinking about this. And it's actually just about time. It's about time running out and time being the most valuable commodity. And I think this is partly because both my parents have died now. And so I've been grieving a lot, actually. But it's also made me think a lot about what I do with the rest of my life. And I'm going to talk a bit about that later. It's also made me think about the projects that so far I'm most proud of. And this is undoubtedly one of them. This is an exhibition for the Wellcome Collection called Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? And it's about graphic design and health. So health-related graphics have often not got much attention. And I've done a lot of work for the Wellcome as a studio we have. And we went to them, myself and Rebecca, and we proposed that we curate an exhibition about graphic design and health, and then my studio designed it. And this was, I have to say, it was a kind of highlight for me. This is what it looked like. It was a super graphic running around the wall. We drew on lots and lots of international work of many different periods, and we included, you know, the variety was huge. We looked at signage systems in hospitals, we looked at condom packets, we looked at the livery of ambulances, we looked at the pharmaceutical industry, we looked at public information, and so on. And the brilliant thing was that we got excellent press coverage and we got over 100,000 visitors. So they were not all graphic designers. And that for us was really key, that we reached beyond the world of graphic design. And that's really what we mean about advocating for what we do. We also did an exhibition about graphic design and politics at the Design Museum in 2018 called Hope to Know. Here's a collection of stills, a very, very different beast in terms of an exhibition, quite chaotic, quite frenzied. We were looking at a very short period of time, 2008 to 2018, and often having to research right under the radar, you know, to contact activists and so on who were making graphic design, but were not trained graphic designers. And we were juxtaposing a lot of that work against what you would think of as political graphic design, party political and so on. Fascinating project, very energetic, very, very stressful, quite depressing at times. And one of the things that we showed was a poster that you can see here that reads, "Slogans in nice typefaces won't save the human races." This poster had been fly posted up in London, and my colleague Dave, who was curating the show with me, had spotted it, and we really wanted to include it. It's the work of an artist and designer called Audley Head. And it's such a provocation that there was, you know, there's a bit of us that thought, yeah, that's true. And then there's another bit of us thinking, but no, that can't be right. We're more important than that. So that was our dilemma. And it kind of took me on to think about this more. I was mindful of this wonderful text from Beatrice Ward from the 1930s, which I'd seen as a sort of call to action, really, for designers. This is a printing office, crossroads of civilization. Friend, you stand on sacred ground. This is a printing office. And I juxtaposed that against the slogans poster and thought, gosh, you know, how do these work together? And I was very lucky in being typographer in residence at HMCT in Los Angeles in 2018. So I said to them, this is what I want to research. I want to kind of dissect this poster. And I produced a show called Nice. And in it, I asked, what is a nice typeface? What do we mean by saving the human race? And is slogan the problem? What are slogans? Are they all good? Are they all bad? How do we define a slogan? If it said books in nice typefaces, what would we feel then? So I was really pulling it apart. And I wrote a sort of retort, if you like. I won't read it all to you at all, but I did say things like, without words, I cannot tell you who I am, and you cannot tell me who you are. Without type, our ideas cannot multiply, and without typefaces, gracious, flamboyant, perfect, uncomfortable, quirky, our texts cannot fly. So, as I said earlier, I've been thinking a lot about the passing of time, and whilst also in the States relatively recently, before COVID, I went to see the Donald Judd exhibition at MoMA in New York, and I was very struck by the last line of the last panel that said, at the time of his death from cancer in 1994, at the age of 65, much remained to be done. Now, I'm not 65, but I thought, oh my God, yes, there's much more I need to do, and I need to focus on it now. So our dead flowers were a sort of reminder, really. They've been in the studio for a long time, and of course they gradually disintegrated, and we documented it, and we made a little film, and a film of it decaying and then going in reverse. Because in a way, what I want to try and think about is, you know, what's next? And in a way, that's a form of rebirth. And I've also been making these, well, ordering these. They're those labels that go into kids' uniforms, but mine say you're a long time dead, and I'm sewing them into my clothes just to remind me every day to try and make the most of the time that I have. It's got me thinking a lot about the value of graphic design in a different sense. In 2019, I worked on a London Design Festival project called Non-Pavilion, and it was really challenging how designers are dealing with climate change, and actually whether in many respects we're responsible for climate change. And I think with graphic design, arguably that's true. I started sporting this t-shirt when I gave talks. It's the end of graphic design as we know it, which caused a bit of a stir, clearly. But it is something I'm really interested in, and it's something I want to explore. And in September, I'm running I have a small exhibition at a gallery in Berlin, which is shown on the left, and it's me trying to work these things out, really. And the show is going to be called, perhaps it's not you, it's me. And it's going to be set up in a sort of pretend bedroom, hence the pillows on the right-hand side. But it's going to be built around a letter that I've written to graphic design, and it's a kind of breakup letter. But of course, it's got a bit of humour about it, and I'm really not sure that I want to break up from graphic design anyway. So it says things like, but I still love you, and so on. But it's my way of exploring what graphic design is now and what I feel about it, and how I feel about being a graphic designer. Talking about climate change, one of the projects that I've done really recently, in fact it's not launched yet, is an animation for the the University of Southampton, I do a lot of work in the engineering department there, actually teaching their students how to communicate their ideas better. And we've been talking a lot around climate change in relation to engineering, which is also a design discipline. And I've been working on this animation. This is the whole animation, but obviously every bit moves and you zoom into parts and so on. But it's been a really joyful experience. So bizarrely, even though the subject matter is potentially bleak, I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, and it's made me think also a lot about pleasure and enjoyment in what we do, of course. Which brings me on to this, which is a sort of pet project, something that I've wanted to do for a long time. So when my dad died, he was a crazy book collector, as you can see on the left-hand side. This is just a teeny amount of his collection. And I knew that he had a copy of Typographic Norms somewhere in his collection. Typographic Norms is a A4 document. It's black, as you can see on the right-hand side, and it's very thin. And it's the work of Anthony Froschau, who's the typographer that I mentioned from the Central School. And my dad had shown me this when I was a student, and I'd always been really captivated by it. And I really was desperate to find his copy, which I did, thankfully. And I took it into the studio when I found it. And I showed it to my studio chums, Dave and John, who actually was taught by Anthony. And they too were captivated. This is what it looks like. It's very minimal. There's an essay at the front, and then essentially it's a depiction of spacing units in metal, standardized, which of course had to be a standardized system, bearing in mind how it worked, metal, in terms of units of measurement. And it's an exploration of these spacing units, set out as tables, as tabular matter, but also as abstract shapes, as you can see here. And even though you could argue it's a very functional object, it also has a real mystery and presence about it, and something that we all, the three of us, were really drawn into. And we thought this is the time to talk about Anthony's work again, because lots of younger designers don't know who he is. And so we were very lucky that HMCT made me International Research Fellow, and they've helped us in funding a project. Certainly the initial research, and we've been working at Brighton, the archive that holds Anthony's work. This is the beginnings of our flat plan, but it's not going to be a book like Typographic Norms. We're asking contemporary designers to respond to typographic norms. We're telling a lot of the backstory, which is something most people don't know about. And of course, we're also interviewing people who Anthony influenced greatly, like Alan Kitchen and so on, but bring it right up to date too. So please look out for it. Typographic Norms 2, which will be out at the beginning of next year. Lastly, in my debating about graphics and what I really feel about it, as people who do a lot of exhibition work, we have to tender and pitch all the time for the museum sector. And a few months ago, I put this up on Instagram, and it said, "Tend to think it's time to intend, stop tending to the tendering." And I had this idea, that's it, I'm not going to do any tenders again, it's a waste of my time. And then we got approached by the National Railway Museum in York, who are part of the Science Museum family, and we've done a lot of work with the Science Museum in the past. And they asked us to tender for something. And so the three of us said, okay, we're going to do it because we really, really love trains, but we're not going to do it the normal way. We're not doing a creative pitch in the normal way, i.e. give them ideas, exhibition design ideas. So I wrote a poem for it. And brilliantly, they really liked the poem, and we're doing the job. So here I am, a Southerner, in front of one of their glorious trains. And we're right at the beginning of the project. But so in terms of my breakup letter to graphic design, I obviously can't quite leave yet, but I'm certainly asking lots of questions of it. So I'm just going to close with this. On the right-hand side, this is from Good Times by Chic. Time marches on, just can't wait. I love a bit of dancing, and I love a bit of disco. And on the left, of course, is a march. This is my daughter on the left holding up a placard at the now failed Brexit marches. But my message really is, I'm thinking about the young, I'm thinking about her, and keep marching. The end.
That's great, Lucy. Thanks for that. Just a couple of things to pick up on. Great that you name-checked the Women's Press, an early job with Suzanne Perkins, who I was communicating with recently about designing typography and information for an aging population.
Yeah.
That as people get older, I have this with my mother as well, but she was saying she's got one of these magnifying glasses with bright light, and she still can't read the instructions on the pack of a pasta or find the date on a guide. And this is going to be something well, we're all going to be facing. And another thing of designer's responsibility, I saw my mum fumbling, couldn't work out which is left and right, and having to stick a yellow sticker, and it's designs that like we've got to rethink. And then also the breakup letter. I think David King went through that period of like thinking, I'm not designing, I'm going to just research and write. And then just lastly,
you know, for me, I do still love graphic design. I definitely do. And actually, once presented with something that like the railway thing, I just, oh no, of course we have to do that. But I still think it's worth asking the questions.
Yeah, there must have been a real. There's often that buzz, isn't there? But if you look at that image for Breakthrough, the frozen bread and the story, it's like that's in my all-time Hall of Fame images. The moment you saw that, must have thought, that's it. That's all you need to see.
I mean, that was just so that people know, that was because one of the supporters from Breakthrough, who died of cancer, she froze all this food for her family before she died. And so when we made that annual report, we commissioned a photographer to photograph a frozen loaf, you know, and that's such a symbolic and powerful image, as you say. Absolutely. Yeah. I feel so really proud to have done that work.
Absolutely, yeah. So stick with us. I think we both will have to mooch ourselves and then come back towards the end. I'm sure there's going to be lots of things to be chatting about that people might want to be asking. I've got, you know, aging better. I've got Sophie Thompson's just made a statement about designers just can't talk about not understanding their carbon footprint anymore. So there's all of this stuff is really current. So I'm going to go to our next speaker. I can see Jim there. Hi, Jim. I'm going to just introduce Jim for a moment.
Hi, Tony. Hi, everyone.
Jim's going to be able to tell us why the start date of Lloyd Northover was a kind of a meaningful year for himself. Jim is a brand strategist, designer, writer, creative consultant. He co-founded and led the internationally acclaimed design consultancy Lloyd Northover for 30 years, probably at a time when it wasn't big business. I can't remember the precise quote, Jim, but it's something about that you wanted to take a look at business through the lens of design and what could happen then. So it was an interesting developmental period, which hopefully going to touch on. Lloyd Northover worked for clients in the UK, across the globe, on identity, branding, communication, signing systems. Jim's now an independent consultant, most recently with Plain Design, working on a number of creative sector and cultural projects. And I know Jim's going to tell us about going back to college later in life. And so he's a writer, and I've worked with Jim on a couple of typographic. So I'm the slightly mad one that gets all anxious and stressed out, and Jim's the, hey, let's just let's take some time, look at this. So Jim, what exactly is it that you do and why? The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Well, I think I'll go just to make sure this all works. I think I'll go straight to the shared screen. Let's see whether this operates. How's that working for everybody?
That's really good, Jim.
Okay. Right. Well, answering the question is bloody difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's not easy to condense 50 years designing into 15 minutes. So I'm not going to try, but in a way I am, because I think perhaps a good way to talk about what I do and why is to track my personal story. And then kind of briefly to go over some reflections on what it might all mean. Just before I kind of start, I don't know whether you can kind of read all this. It goes off the screen actually, but a bit for me. But this was I wanted to sort of tee up the discussion. I found this quote. It's from 20 years ago, 2001. It was an interview with me published in the Director magazine. That's the Institute of Directors magazine. And they were profiling my partnership with John Lloyd and asking lots of questions about designers and what they do and where it's going. And this was one of the comments I thought was pertinent, and I kind of still believe this is the case. Over the last 30 years, design has had a big impact on the corporate world. The next challenge is about changing attitudes and environments, about concentrating on the developing world and getting the developed world onto a more responsible path. Now, this is 2001. I mean, everything that's happened since actually makes me sure that this comment was apposite, if not before its time, but certainly, and I'm not happy about saying this, but certainly I think we're much clearer that, of the work that needs to be done in relation to all of this. Okay, so trajectory, which is, the path I've taken, if you like. I think it's, before I go to that, let me just go back to this and say one or two things. I think design started for me in my early teens. I fell in love with modern European architecture and design. I had two elder brothers. They'd gone into interior design and furniture design. And they joined my family business, which was retail furniture and home interiors. So graphics seemed the natural place for me to go. And particularly, as earlier, I thought I'd go into architecture, but it became clear to me on my third attempt to pass O-level maths that it was going to be too much of a stretch for my unmathematical brain. So graphics it was. First stop, Kingston. Kingston in those days, this 1964, a classic basic design experience, I think it was, very good and very rounded. Then on to the London College of Printing for 3 years. This is a copy of the type book that was issued to me in October 1965, as it was to all students. And it had pages of type, mainly from the sort of monotype series, which you had to trace over and draw from. That was part of the training. And I was interested in going to the LCP, partly because I thought typography was really the business end of graphics. If you like, illustration was the more arty end. And I thought, actually, this typography stuff really interesting. It links with my interest in words and literature. And it's a kind of means of expression that's really kind of quite different from what I'd kind of grown up and been used to in terms of, fine art, drawing and painting, which I loved and still do. So the LCP was a really diverse culture. I mean, George Adams was there. He was an ex-student from the Bauhaus teaching us. Of course, Tom Eckersley, the doyen of poster design, led the design department at that time and was a great inspiration. But there were lots of different people there with different backgrounds, many from Europe, some from America. And I think it was a very kind of rich period. Touching on a couple of things here, these are a couple of posters. We had the opportunity to design posters and get them printed within the college. These are two I designed for the college film society. Normally the posters tended to take stills from the film that was being shown or visual references. I wanted to try something different. I wanted to play with words and play with typography. And both of these, if you like, are critical comments around these two particular films. And it's not just it wasn't just sort of in college stuff. We got a terrific opportunity sometimes to design stuff outside of college. And this is an early collaboration with my later business partner. This was for the Whitechapel Gallery exhibition, and we did a series, I think, of 3 or 4 exhibitions for them in terms of posters and catalogue design. That picture actually is completely uncredited by me as a rogue student. It's by Lord Snowdon, and it's of Rudolf Nureyev. But there we go. Sorry, just gone. And by the time we'd left, I think the student world was in turmoil. It was 1968. We were the English 68ards. It was the year of sit-ins and of course student riots. It was all worthy and radical, and I was up for that. But it was also a bit introspective. I mean, frankly, I wanted to get out into the world and start doing stuff. And when I left, these are some of the names and faces I worked for in those early years. From these 4 guys, I think I learned a lot about leadership, about the purpose of a design business, which I think for all of them was about making their clients successful, as simple as that. And it was about a design lifestyle. And that was embodied by Conran in particular. And my lunch interview back in about 1970 was straight out of Elizabeth David, an omelette served with a glass of wine. And I thought, well, this is a lifestyle I could take to. So in 1975, John and I took the plunge. It was a significant year because we both left jobs, we both got married, our partners remained in the companies we'd previously worked for. We stuffed a few £100 of savings into the bank and rented a space from architect Richard Rogers, while most of his team were off in Paris designing the Pompidou Centre. So it was a key year. It was kind of pivotal in a way for us, kind of going from, if you like, the safety of creative businesses and sort of plunging headlong into a kind of freelance world. These are some of the early clients were people like the Arts Council, the Royal Shakespeare Company, National Trust, and Letraset there. As you can see, our aesthetic wasn't really, it was an eclectic one. I mean, what we did, we responded to the task in front of us and chose the right graphic means as we saw it to solve those problems and to have a bit of fun. And each year we would celebrate with champagne and a new t-shirt, our t-shirt design, our survival. We moved from Soho to Covent Garden and started growing the business. And bigger assignments came and went. I think we felt quite often that doing a small part of a client's design, for example, an annual report, why couldn't we do everything for them? You know, they might have a great annual report or something like that, but what about the rest of it? And this is really where we launched headlong into the kind of world of corporate identity as it was known then. And I think it was interesting. We sort of built a team, and as the biggest assignments came our way, there was a remarkable energy in our team, quite astonishing, the kind of, if you like, the power of a group of people kind of working together incessantly on quite high profile jobs. Some awards followed, and here's one trophy we won, which was seriously overlooked. This is our all-female basketball team who were champions of the Design Company League. Little story we're quite pleased about. And by the end of the 1980s, I think we were over 50 people, and here we are in Paris on a celebratory day trip. Now, not long after this, those clouds in the background over IMP's Louvre pyramid formed and became a thunderstorm in the design world, I think. Everybody who was in practice then kind of went from boom to bust. All three of those employers I mentioned, all their businesses failed in some way or another. We had to hunker down, grow much smaller, and we managed to survive by a series of collaborations and deals. The UK market was absolutely dead, and we had to start looking for business internationally. I mean, we were fortunate because we won a project for the new Hong Kong Airport Railway, which was being built. It was the largest civil engineering project back in the early 90s in the whole world. And then we went on to design for the whole Hong Kong metro system. Let's just say that one, some images from that period. And of course, Chinese culture was completely new to me, and typography, all of that was, had to get our heads around that from a standing start, the way that Chinese type works. Each character is based on the square, but obviously high level of complexity. So how you marry that up with English text and different proportions is critical. And it was significant in other ways, because suddenly we had to kind of change gear. And I think 4 of us flew out to start running this project at a little more than a week's notice, to set up, find a flat, an office, and open a bank account, and kind of get moving. And through the 90s and into the 2000s, we managed to kind of build back the business. And at different times, let's just switch on to this one. Sorry, I think I've jumped. No, I've jumped one. At different times, we had teams both in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Dubai, in New York, in Los Angeles, and in San Francisco. So we'd sort of spread out and were running the business in a very different way, with project teams kind of decentralized across the world. It meant a lot of traveling in those days, and was quite an exhausting period for us. But back in the UK, one of my key typographic projects was to redesign the National Rail sign system for the digital age. And this led to a wonderful collaboration with Frida Sack, and it was indeed Frida who first introduced me to the ISTD. And this is the Brunel typeface, which we designed as part of our commission, and then we put the package together, which is now increasingly running out over all of the major stations. And I think actually it'll go into the network as we kind of get back to kind of renationalization, maybe. So by the time my 60th birthday came around, I stopped to reflect. And I did something which I think was very important for me, which was to take a part-time MA in design writing at LCC. So here I was back at my old college after a 40-year gap, and working with a cohort of fellow students who were the ages of my children, roughly. It changed my thinking and gave me an opportunity to do some research in a range of things, and including the importance of place in relation to creativity and creative practice. So moving on, 2012, I thought, this is enough. I've reached 65. I'm going to do something on my own. I started my own business, just me. And before I knew it, I had no plan. I just wanted to see what would happen. And if it was a total retirement, that would have been fine. But as it happened, I was immediately kind of invited to work on a project in the Middle East, in Qatar, in fact. So here I went through learning about a very different culture, and again, different typographic scripts, you know, with obviously Arabic running from right to left rather than left to right. How do you get kind of parity between the English and the Arabic script when they need to appear together? Also dealing with Arabic calligraphy, which is a kind of very interesting kind of form of typography. And one of the ways it's done is actually looking at how certain typefaces have been designed simultaneously. This is one, Tanzik, to work in English and Arabic alongside one another. So similar spacing and proportion. So that's kind of quite an interesting insight, I think. And as things do, I soon found a sort of natural return to my home base here in Sussex. And I've been working on creative and kind of cultural projects in the county and really across the southeast of England. Now, these have been lovely collaborations with Claire Plain and her team at Plain Design based in Hastings. So there's some interesting stuff here, and it's brought in some of what I discovered in working for the MA. It kind of brought me back to the whole idea of place and how place is used by creative people, both writers and artists and designers in Sussex, everybody from Eric Gill to Virginia Woolf and so on. And name escapes me, Lee Miller at Farley's and so on. So these are photographers, artists, designers, writers, all in Sussex, all in a really exciting period of modernism in the early part of the 20th century. So I think, like many designers, you know, we often start out painting and drawing and that kind of stuff we do. And I've returned to these too, and printmaking as well, and fitting them around some other projects, a kind of circularity, if you like. So stop, pause to reflect. And I just sort of asked myself a few questions. You know, type, why do I like type? Why do I bother about it? And it's really this, it's because it's ubiquitous, it's quotidian, it's a basic craft skill, it's a fundamental part of culture and of civilization. For me, it's to say it's a low art is probably the wrong way, but it has that thing of being ever present and everywhere and every day that I love. And that's what makes it powerful. And when I kind of think about it, I thought, well, you know, what's changed in my working life? Well, if you go back to Gutenberg and say 1450 and the beginning of movable type, I mean, actually not much happened between then and the 1980s. The advent of the Apple Mac, of course, changed everything. It was the biggest shift in over 500 years. You could say it was the time when analog gave way to digital. And I had half my working life in one era and half in the other. So when I was asked in the early 20s some questions, and this was in an interview with Designer Magazine 2005, what makes someone a designer? It's a desire to change the world. And the visible world provides most of the stimulus and information our brains received. We can't change nature, and we wouldn't want to. We can change everything else. Well, incredibly hubristic, but on the other hand, I think it expresses what I feel, which is design has the potential to make change happen if we care to use it, and to use it in ways that are significant. And it can be obviously in a technological sense, it can be very powerful, but also it can be persuasive and getting people, I think, as Lucienne mentioned, getting people to change their behavior, to think differently about things. And I think it's in that area that I see typography and graphic design being particularly influential. And they asked me, what do I most enjoy about design? And for me, actually, it's this. And I don't think it's changed since in the last, 20 years, nearly, or 15 years. Unraveling complexity, cracking problems, clarifying messages, making things look beautiful and intellectually satisfying, and working as part of a team with bright people. Those are all things that I think are kind of what makes design important for me, and why I'm still continuing doing it at the age of nearly 75. And I think some people say, well, what is it that makes a good designer? What do you think? Well, my answer to that really is this, I think, apart from some of the obvious talents or skills that we may have in relation to design, I think these are important. To be an observer, to look closely and to see in new ways if you can. To be an interrogator. Listening is an extremely important part, I think, of being a designer. And to ask difficult questions. Being naive is actually an asset sometimes about, enables you to ask questions that perhaps others wouldn't. To be an empathist, to put yourself in their place. That may be your client's place or your client's customer's place or whoever they may be addressing. And finally, to be a good collaborator, to work as a member of a team. I think the best ideas rarely come from an individual, but from a group of minds working together with a common purpose. So, how is a designer meant to operate in all of this? Well, I think there's kind of three things that sort of want to leave you with. One is it's about doing, experimenting and learning by doing. I think the second is about making work as good as you can and having a conscience that goes with it. And finally, I think it's about working at a problem. It's about being resilient and about not giving up easily. And I think on that note, Tony, it's back to you.
Hi, Jim. Stay there for a moment. I've got three things to pick up on. Hopefully I get them sequentially in the right order. Just going back to the late 60s and being at college. I mean, college was reflecting changes in society. It was a great cultural, in a boiling pot. Is it true that you saw the pop band, The Who, at the London College of Printing? Or is that not correct?
No, that's not correct.
Oh.
I didn't. I missed it. It was on, but I missed it.
Yeah, and then the Velvet...
I can't put that in my claim to fame, unfortunately.
Oh, no. And the Velvet Underground played there as well as their first gig. And then in the late 80s, the photograph of the company, I don't know if you mentioned the facts and figures there, but when we were talking last week, you mentioned that there was 50 staff, 50% were women, and 4 of the 50% women were on the management positions. And you seem to be quite sort of proud of that. I mean, that's like the late 80s. We're even today, still the reports are, the gaps within that kind of inclusivity and representation. But that seemed to be something that you were quite proud of what Lloyd Northover managed to achieve.
I don't think it was so much that I was proud of it. It was kind of reflecting on this much later. And when people saying, okay, this our profession's dominated by white middle-aged males, and that's hard to do. But I then sort of thought, well, actually, what was it like? And and did we have a reasonable representation of women and ethnic diversity? And I think the answer was probably with ethnic diversity, no. but certainly with a kind of, you know, gender balance, I think the answer was yes. And I think, you know, I think that was, we didn't plan it. It wasn't even conscious, but I think looking back, I was just sort of saying, well, I check, how did we do against those criteria? And I think, frankly, we were okay. And I think there was certainly no differential in pay. I think we always assumed that, you know, what we were after is were the best designers and the best team players, and everything else was immaterial, really.
Yeah. And then to come more up to date, you were mentioning type and the sense of place being quite an important thing, and that set of typefaces that you developed for places. I think it began with its Palmyra.
Oh yeah, so that was really a project, a sort of personal project, really. I just had an opportunity to do some screen printing at a local college here, and I was struck by at the time, a few years ago, by the incredible destruction of Palmyra in Syria, and how the place had, you know, been brought to its knees. And it encouraged me to kind of think about cities that I'd been to and worked in, and try and capture, you know, I hadn't been to Palmyra, but capture those ones. What was the spirit of those places? And try to capture those very simply in graphic terms by just taking the name of the city, the very word, and then, you know, cutting a relevant type form for that, and just kind of assembling them in a pattern as a kind of graphic device. It was purely a personal project with no client, and a few of those are really good to have.
Okay,
after many years of serving others.
So hang around for the last bit. Thanks for your presentation. Really nice to have that journey through your life. And we'll go back to mute, and I'll introduce Andy, who's our third and final guest tonight. So Andy formed the multidisciplinary design group Why Not Associates with fellow graduates David Ellis and Howard Greenhalgh. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I was watching YouTube videos on pronouncing that name. They set up in '87 when they graduated from the RCA. Seems to be a time where there were a few people getting together, like Andy Haslam and Phil Baines, I think, were on the course at the time. They kind of got together. So it seemed to be a really good launch pad for young design groups at that time. So in over 30 years as an agency, Andy's worked for Malcolm McLaren, Pompidou Centre, BBC, Channel 4, Tate Modern, and including the award-winning Comedy Carpet in Blackpool. Andy's been collecting tat for 30 years and recently published a book documenting this. The publisher Circa described the common thread as a fundamental love of typography, research, and experimentation. So I think this is a good point to ask Andy, what's his view on what exactly is it that you do and why? So if I could introduce Andy, if Andy can come to the screen with his presentation, that'll be all good. Let's see if Andy's still there. Yeah, Andy, so you'll have to unmute, and Jim's muted, so I'm going to mute and hand over to Andy, who you'll need to, there you go.
Can you hear me now? I can't hear you though.
Over to you, Andy. Okay.
Hi, thanks, Tony. Thank you, everyone. It's so weird talking just to your screen when you know there's quite a few people out there. Very strange. Anyway, I'm going to try and share my screen there. So let's see. I'm a bit of a Luddite, so bear with me. Can you see that? I hope you can. So So what exactly is it that you do and why? It's quite a difficult question to answer, I think, because I'm not actually quite sure what I do and why I do it. But fundamentally, I think it goes back to your roots.
So Andy, we've still got just a black screen. I don't know if we can, whether technical folks can advise. It was okay when we just saw the whole of it like that.
Let me, sorry.
No probs.
Been one of those days, isn't it? Is that looking any better?
I think so. Yeah. I'm going to mute again.
Window. And that's, is that big enough, do you think?
It looks good to me. I think the tech people are saying much better.
Much better. Could try harder, it used to say on my school report. Anyway, I'll persevere with the way it is. So this is me, aged 7. And the reason I put this in, because my mum once caught me sat at the kitchen table staring at an HP sauce bottle, which is still my favourite sauce, and asked me why I was looking at it. And I was just looking at the design of it. And I turned to her and just said, well, somebody has to do this, don't they? Somebody has made this, laid this thing out. So I think it was fundamentally my blood that I was kind of interested in design. Anyway, I went to school, and although I went to the grammar school, I wasn't a great academic, but the only thing I was actually comfortable doing was kind of art. So I decided to go on a foundation course, and then I ended up at St. Martin's School of Art in the early 80s, which was a brilliant place to be, and it kind of changed my life basically. Because St. Martin's has this reputation where they find all the people of different extremes and throw them in together and see what happens. It's like a melting pot of madness, really, but I loved every minute of it. But there I kind of learnt the rules of graphic design. So this was a project about a Braun radiogram. But you've got to imagine students now that there was no computer at this time. So those lines are drawn with a pen, a felt tip, and the typography is on acetate. That was a PMT, and all the pictures were PMT. So it was really like a craft thing we had to learn at the time, but it was very good grounding. And they had one of the first Apple computers, and I was bullied by one of the tutors, Richard Dowse, to do a poster for them. And at first I didn't want to do it at all because I hated computers, because I hated maths. I was so useless at maths at school. I wasn't interested, but he kept saying, no, you can do something interesting. As soon as I got on it, I realized what a mad toy it was. So although the typography on this is incredibly weak, the actual A letter form was really interesting, and me kind of abusing the really crude printing that was available at the time. So it gave me, suddenly I wasn't scared of computers. But at the time, as a student, I always kept scrapbooks. And they were kind of really important to me because they were a kind of escape from some of the projects that were set at St. Martin's, which I found a bit restrictive and very little self-expression and things. So I kept these scrapbooks where I just stuck things I found and scribbled in them and things. But they were kind of really important to me. They kept me sane. And any sort of typographic things I liked that I found, I stuck in, or I experimented with the machine that I was doing this Not Helvetica on, where there were so few fonts. I was so bored with using Helvetica that I tried to bastardize it. But below that is a bit of Phil Baines's work that he gave me with his markup, a bit like Mr. Froshag or Froshag. I don't quite sure how you pronounce his name. We saw earlier in Lucian's tour. But I was even ripping posters off walls and sticking them in. Great wrestling poster. But what some of the tutors told me at St. Martin's was, oh, that's very nice, Andy, that work, what you've done there. but you can't do that in the real world. And I remember thinking, why couldn't we do that in the real world? So I then went to the Royal College to try and get confidence enough to try and do this kind of thing in the real world. And this was just an experiment I did for trying to do the RCA branding that never happened, but it was fun to do. But a collaboration, which collaborations have been a really important part of my career, I guess, with David and Howard, who started Why Not with, but also with artists like Gordon Young, with photographers. But this was actually with Phil Baines and David Ellis at the Royal College. So this was a magazine that we did called Yak, or it was my magazine, I guess, and they worked with me on it. This was the poster that I did. So it's using a photocopy to get that blurred type, but it's also using letterpress and silkscreen, so whatever was available to us. You can see there it says, God bless the photocopier. This was the actual magazine that came in an envelope, and the envelopes were actually very kindly given me from the guys from Octavo. This was one of the pages, which was about one of my heroes, Kurt Schwitters. So that's all letterpress, the main text in black. So it was kind of, again, just playing. I mean, basically, I've just been playing for 33 years. So this was playing with letterpress. And then here are David's, myself's, and Phil's each page. I mean, it was only an 8-page magazine, but it was just a really interesting thing to do. Again, it was the fun of collaboration. But fundamentally, the thing that actually I like more than anything else is the process of going through a project. And this is the overprint of the whole thing. As we were doing it, we were kind of just overprinting just to get the colours going. And in the end, I love the overprint more than the final thing. And this is a theme that has recurred throughout my work, really, that the process brings up things that you'd never imagine doing or liking, rather than the thing you had in your head to start with. But I did some soap powder boxes. I have a kind of weird fascination with soap powder because I'm from a town in Warrington that up till very recently used to make Purcell. And I worked there as a student, and my grandparents worked there, and my dad worked there at different times. Anyway, I had this thing about soap powder. I wanted to do something called Yak as well that went with the magazine. So I did these soap powder boxes. So again, they were really crudely made because all we had was this tiny little printer from the computer, and then they're silkscreened over the top again. But I'd basically taken all the words from a DAS packet and rearranged them and tried to do something completely that did not look like a washing powder packet. But at the Royal College show, the show was closed for the day while Prince Charles came round. And what I did was I had all my soap powder packets and I sprinkled the soap powder all over the floor, so everyone trod it into my stand, as it were. And they're all getting slightly panicked as Prince Charles came around the corner, because Howard and I had taken the soap powder and written the word Charlie in massive letters on the floor next to my soap. Now, actually, at the time, I don't think I knew the word Charlie meant cocaine, which kind of loses the joke now looking at it. But anyway, it's one of those sort of mad moments as a student, I guess. But when we left college, we left college and we formed a company called Why Not Associates. And this sort of quote from George Bernard Shaw kind of really summed up our attitude as to why we were called Why Not, in a way. You see things and you say why, but I dream things that never were, and I say why not. And it's always that questioning. I'm always kind of questioning why things should be that way. Can't they be a different way? And I think it's just a really important thing to do in life in general. So we formed kind of by accident a company because Howard worked on a project and they had a design. They needed a magazine designing, and he asked David and I whether we would help him. So it was kind of completely unplanned. So the day we put our degree show up was the day we started Why Not in 1987. This is a poster for a book we did after 10 years, which was using fireworks. So we almost killed ourselves and the photographer trying to do this, actually. a big black cutout question mark with fireworks through the middle, sparklers and things. But got some amazing kind of results, again, not knowing quite what was going to happen, but trying it anyway. It's that will to play, will to experiment, I think. I mean, we still felt like we were at college, to be honest. But then we kept landing more and more work. So this was for the ICA, for an exhibition about chairs. I mean, some of these banners were kind of almost illegible at times, but it didn't really matter to us at the time. We were just experimenting with these little huge silk screens. And then we've done various things over the years, and this is a book about typography that we did with Edward Booth Clibborn and Rick Poyner. Again, was a massive moment for us in terms of we didn't think it would be successful, and then was incredibly successful, and kind of changed design publishing, I think, in a way, because the publishers suddenly realized they could make a load of money out of design. And because the book sold something like 120,000 copies or something mad, which was, for a book on type, was kind of unheard of. But over the years, we worked for lots of galleries, Royal Academy, doing lots of things for them. And the one on the left, probably the most well-known one we did, the Sensation poster, because it isn't actually a piece of work from the exhibition. It's my iron, or an iron we bought at the time. It's not my tongue though, I don't know whose tongue that is, it's a photo library. But quite unusual to be able to not use an image from the exhibition, not a Damien Hirst or a Rachel Whiteread or something. But we did a lot of work for the Tate, again, lots of posters, which are always really nice things to do. Catalogues. I mean, we were so fortunate in the breadth of work we did. I'd say more broad than virtually anybody else at the time, I think, in terms of what we were doing. This I put in because it's another idea of why not, in a way. This idea of failing better. So this is a Samuel Beckett quote: ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. That idea of experimenting and playing. And, if it does go wrong, it doesn't matter. You just try again. But that was the inspiration, was out of one of my scrapbooks from St. Martin's, because I'd torn up an old Ladybird book that was falling apart, and this one page with all this type on where some child had scribbled in it, I just kind of basically stole it. But that's okay. He was too young to know. We did a lot of moving image stuff as well. So a lot of stuff for Channel 4, like program idents, but also loads of TV commercials, stuff on the left with Clayton, who worked with us, and Gustavo did an amazing job. That's all animated script, hand-drawn script fonts. Just fascinating. We employed a lot of really talented people. And again, it was the collaborative thing of taking a risk on some of these young people and just giving them a free hand, have a go. I think that's what we were good at, is letting them, not trying to control them. That's a more recent set of TV ads for the Telegraph that Clayton did with David. But we also did very, very minimal things and branding. So this was Mark Quinn, the artist. So this is all pure letterpress printed, proper old school. So we're never scared to do really simple things as well as doing the sort of mad things. It was whatever suited. But again, that was the sort of massive learning curve going back to letterpress. And about 20, 30 years ago, I met a guy called Gordon Young, who's an artist. And we were working together on the same project up in Hull. And we just became friends. And then he asked me and David if we could help him with a project, putting type on one of his projects. And he just grew and grew and grew. And this was a set of trees that we did in Crawley Library, typographic trees. We did loads of things, and we have done things with him. These are some seats in Swansea that spell out Pobble and machines. Pobble is Welsh for people, outside a museum. But again, really interesting is how do you make a letter form a seat? For me, really fascinating thing to work with him on. But again, it's that collaborative thing. And he's great because he kind of respects what I do, but he also lets me have my say as well, you know, which is unusual with artists in a lot of ways. And then we did the comedy carpet sort of over 10 years ago now with Gordon. So it was his idea. So that's looking down from Blackpool Tower, but it was the projects of a lifetime really in terms of the scale of it and the amount of man hours it took to not only design, but to make. That's it on the opening day, or a detail of it. So it's made out of granite and concrete, and it's basically the history of British comedy with no one credited. That's the Gordon's great idea, that no one's credited. You have to know who that is to know. And if you don't, you don't. But for me, what was most fascinating about that project was doing the research with Gordon. We read hundreds of books about comedy, and for me, the research is actually now more interesting than the design, because you're learning so much. So every time I do a project, it's more about the research. So I think why I do what I do now is because I'm learning things, always learning things. I'm really happy to learn things. You've kind of learned a lot about design, but when you get, I think graphic designers are very lucky that you can suddenly be in a field of work that you've got no knowledge of, and suddenly you become an expert in it. And it's one of the few jobs that can happen in. A detail, obviously that's from a Carry On film. And this is the way it was made. So again, it was the process that was really interesting to me as well. So this is the water cutting machine that's cutting through 30mm granite. It basically cuts like a knife through butter. It's quite outstanding when you see this 1mm jet of water cutting through. And then what's left over, again, it's the process. There was all these amazing bits of leftover graphics, and we were like, wow, these are just brilliant. And so many students asked me after a talk, where can I get some? We thought, well, why don't we just sell them? So in an exhibition at Jealous Gallery in Shoreditch, and that's Clayton helping me set it all up. And it was just great. People just have a fragment of the comedy carpet in their house now. But again, it's that wonderful thing of experiment and process. And after about 30 years, we were asked to have an exhibition in Japan at the GGG gallery of our work, and we needed a title. And I think Jim mentioned this a couple of times. This is a Spike Milligan quote. I stole this blatantly. We never had a plan, so nothing could go wrong. And basically we didn't. We came out of college with no plan whatsoever, and we just played, and people kept giving us work. But what we did do was make the most of the good luck we had, and we worked really hard. It's 10% talent, it's 90% hard work, in my opinion. And that's what we did. All the team, David and I, Howard, you know, we worked like mad for a long time. Anyway, it got to a point where I had had enough, really, that I wanted to just go on my own. Why Not was 33 years old. So just pre-COVID, strangely, we decided to close the studio, which is obviously very difficult, making people redundant. Not an easy thing to do, but it just felt it was time to do it. So we're both kind of working on our own now, from home. And so I decided the first project was to do a book of tat, which was basically my collection of graphic ephemera that I've had since I was at St. Martin's and before, really, and putting it all in a book. So it was purely self-indulgent thing to do, but it was basically one of my scrapbooks from college. So it's a 360 thing. I think you start out designing when you're in your late teens, early 20s, and eventually you end up going back to exactly what you did then. And I think Jim kind of said that. He's ended up going back to painting and drawing, and I've gone back to sticking things in sketchbooks. I didn't want a worthy design essay from a critic in the front of this. I just wanted it to be really simple, because it's basically a book of tat. It doesn't deserve an essay. So it's basically a book of tat, printed ephemera, graphic nonsense, typographic trash, collected over 30 years, stuck in a book. It is what it says on the tin. but it's just full of stuff. Obviously, there are layers of stuff overprinted. It's just the soap powder boxes that I've got loads of. Again, slight obsession. The only fonts I used was Cooper Black throughout, which has a wonderful tact quality to it, I think. But it was nice to write. I wrote bits of text in it, not much, but for me that was a new thing, and I'd kind of quite like to do more of that now. And then these were the overprint, these are the running sheets. So I asked the printer in Italy to save the running sheets. And he did, and what we did was we made them into the slip cases. So each slip case is individual, and it has a foil block over the top. So they're all kind of different. Again, it's that process, embracing the process. So I'm still not sure why I do it. Is it in my HP source DNA? I think it is. It's just in your DNA. And I still continue to explore the passions and directions that I discovered as a student. And basically, I just can't help myself. I don't think it's in my blood. And it's a bit of a cliche, and why not? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Andy. I think that came in on time. I think
Did I do it in 15 minutes, Tony?
definitely, that was definitely 15 minutes.
Good.
There's a question I can see from someone that's good for you, but I'll just pick up on, just that 1980s, the 1990s was a period of new technologies coming in, developing new visual languages. There was a lot around at the time. There was the McCoys at Cranbrook in the States. There was Gert Dunbar coming into the Royal College of Art. You mentioned Octavo. It seemed to be a point of change. What do you reflect on that? I mean, there might have been, I was kind of feeling more of the straight modernist, but clearly things it was time to move on. Maybe like with music, with punk saying, we've got to move this on a little bit. Did you get any of that sense of being a part of some sort of, dramatic, exciting change at the time?
I think you have to understand, we weren't that far after punk. Punk ended in 78 or something, and we were starting in the early 80s. It wasn't that far behind. So we were teenagers when punk started, so we're massively influenced by that. But I think, to be honest, we were rebelling against what we saw as the industry that was being created of graphic design. So you had your Michael Peters and your Terence Conrads. That's exactly what we didn't want to be. We didn't want to be 200 people. We wanted to be a few people just messing about and not having to wear a suit. Do you know what I mean? I think every generation is rebellious to the past one, and that was kind of who we were probably rebelling against. And that was very British, whereas in Holland at the time, Studio Dunbar, Total Design, and like you said, Cranbrook, there were people doing other things at the same time of us. Well, obviously Dunbar had been established well before us, but it was in that spirit, and it was a spirit of rebellion, I guess.
Yeah.
A lot of
bringing that up to date. Another thing that you said was like, say with the soap packets. Well, why not? Why does the world have to look like that? Why can't it look a different way?
Exactly.
What about now? Are you seeing the same? Before that we had Peter Dixon and the Sainsbury's packaging, which was like, wow, did that ever exist? What are your thoughts today in 2021? Are you seeing people again challenging, saying, well, why does that have to look like that? Why can't it be like this?
No, I definitely see that. There's always going to be pockets of people challenging things like that. There always has been, and there always will be. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I'm too old. I only know the old designers like Mr. Barnbrook and people, who are definitely revolutionary in their time. But our time has kind of gone in a way, and it's the new blood who should be changing things.
Yeah.
You can't keep that up. You are what you are, and it's very hard to design in a different way.
Yeah.
The very few people able to do that.
I mean, maybe that's a good message for, you know, if there's people that have just become a new ISTD member doing the student project, that the world is theirs. You know,
yes.
What do you want to do with it? You know, like it's almost like the baton. I think Lucy's talked about the baton. Say you've picked it up, you've run with it. You know, you can hand it over.
Yeah, well, I think I look at myself and think, well, if this idiot can do it, anyone can do it. Basically, you know, it's having the courage or the naivety. You know, we were just very naive. I don't think we thought we were trying to change the world. I don't think we did change the world, but we were just trying to do our own thing in our own way.
Yeah.
And hoping that somebody paid us to do it.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, you still need to get paid.
Yeah. So before we go into the Q&As, this one Q&A came in, I thought it's from Benedict Richards in London. And if you could go back to that boy staring at the HP bottle, is there something that the Andy of now would say to that boy, or you know, it could be you as a student, if you were to go back, you know, and say, here's some advice from the older Andy, what might you say?
Try to enjoy it more. Try to enjoy the journey more. Yeah. Because when you run a business, you get lost, you know, because you've got other people working with you, you've got their problems to deal with. It's trying to sit back and appreciate how lucky you are for a start to be doing that, and not get too annoyed when things go wrong. You're actually in a really, really privileged position to be doing what you're doing, and appreciate it more. And I think there's times I just used to get so annoyed with clients and things that I didn't actually, should have stood back a bit, you know.
Okay, can we bring Jim and Lucy back and keep Andy there as well? So we've got a few questions. There's going to be some for the general, whoever wants to pick it up. But we've got, I'm just going to have to pick these up and say them. I haven't got any pre-planned things here. Jonathan Hamilton, who's at Nottingham Trent University, says, what are your thoughts on First Things First manifesto currently, where graphic design often aids branding in convincing us to keep consuming? Yeah.
Shall I jump in? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what I'll say about that, which is no disrespect to lots of other people who work, but you know, I never went into that territory for that very reason. And actually, I think there's a point at which you just have to say, you know, are you doing? You have to be honest about the repercussions of what you do, and obviously, and we know a lot more about the repercussions now, and there's some things we shouldn't do, and that's the end of it, as far as I can see. You know, that's not branding per se, is it? It's to do with what that company's doing. But I'm also really aware that there's, and I've always felt this, that there's no such thing as clean money. I mean, in that, you know, I've done a lot of work for charities, but the people who are giving money to those charities, I don't question where that money comes from. So, you know, I can't hold my hands up and say I'm, you know, pure or something. It's not like that.
No.
But it's about being aware, really.
Yeah, there's another question from, there's a few questions, guys, we'll come to you next, but it's again for Lucy, I guess it's on the similar sorts of grounds about, from Lelia Aluihare in Colombo. And she's saying, after all your research into ethics and graphic design, how do you feel towards these notions today? Has anything changed since you published the book?
Actually, I think people are much more aware. I mean, it wasn't, you know, it's interesting thinking about my generation. I'm the same generation as Andy, and what was the kind of norm, if you like, at the time, and to be talking about politics within graphics was really, really rare. I was seen as really odd that I drew some correlation between the two. Whereas now, and having worked on Hope to Nope, you know, that was in 2018, that it's something that lots and lots of designers are thinking about the repercussions of what they do from an ethical position. Ethics is much wider than politics and that in party politics, and and I think that's great. Actually, it's really good. It's a dialogue that we should be having. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I can see there's other things about societal concerns, but we'll maybe balance things out a little bit. This can be for anyone, Jim, Andy, Lucy. It's from Becky Chilcott in Australia. So I'm trying to go around the world now. We are an international society, so that's often forgotten. So Becky has asked, which piece of advice you received as a student was the most valuable and you find yourself passing on? Now, I will tell you that Becky's tutors were Dave Dabner and Eugenie Dodd. And Dave Dabner is known for the F word to come into his bits of advice, such as, do you effing want to be here? So that I know that was Becky's experience. So Jim, Andy, Lucy, what piece of advice you received?
Repeat the question, can you, Tony?
I'll do. Which piece of advice you received as a student was the most valuable you find yourself passing on? For me, I remember one tutor saying to me, I've got to try and not do the swearing bit, because I always used to be swearing. For sake, this is the 80s, not the 70s. This is when I thought if you're doing something for electronic music, you had to use a typeface that looked like electronic. And a nicer tutor explained to me that it could be more subtle. So I always think about, the harsh criticism of getting shot down and being told that I seem to be locked in the 1970s. So this is just, as a student, you get these bits of advice coming in, and sometimes it's a shocker. And but maybe there's something that you think that still makes sense. That's why I repeat this bit of advice that I was given.
Well, I
remember being given.
Sorry,
Go on, Andy.
No, Jim, you go.
Okay, I just remembered a tutor called Neil Meacher at Kingston when I was in there, and he said, if you want to be a graphic designer, you need to be prepared to come into work in a clean white shirt every day. Now, I've never taken on board as a recommendation, but I thought it was very kind of interesting, because I think it made the point that, look, you guys have turned up at art school, but actually, there's a lot else going on here, and you're about to go out in a world where you're actually working in a context where you're providing a service to other people. You're using your skills to do that. You don't have to dumb them down, but you need to, if you want to cut through, you need to be actually kind of working in the language of the people you're talking to. So I think he was wrong, but I think there was a kind of point at which, if you're going to be successful, people need to kind of trust you. That maybe used to be about wearing a tie, but also I think it must be about kind of establishing some kind of dialogue where they don't think of you as a completely unworldly creature. Because I think if you're going to influence people, you need to be able to see things from their point of view. You don't have to agree with them, but you need to see them from their point of view, and then you can begin to change things. I mean, we were simultaneously working at one point for the Health Education Council, doing a series of booklets on how to stop smoking. And we were also working for a tobacco company. And the tobacco company wrote to us and said, I think you should stop doing this. I don't think you should be working for them anymore. And we gave a very robust statement and said, look, we'll choose our clients, thank you very much. We're quite happy to work with both of you. We'll try and improve what you do in your communications. And we weren't working on fag packets. We were actually working on their management magazine. We were doing editorial work, so it wasn't directly about promoting tobacco. And I think, the ethics of this is kind of quite interesting, because going back to the earlier thing, because I'd like to think we make right and good choices in what we do. But I think it's also the case we can't do a kind of ethical audit on every client before we start working with them. And I think sometimes being able to influence change from the inside, working with them, is more honourable than standing away and just say, we can't touch you. You're too difficult. You're too dangerous.
Okay.
But having said that, I think the world's moved on, and my first quote was really about actually we need to be looking at the developing world now, stopping looking at high levels of consumerism, looking at climate change, and that's what I said back in 2001. If I was starting a business again now, it would be a very different agenda, and I'm not actually sure it would be graphics in the way we know it. It might be something quite different.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions.
Sorry, Andy, I stole some time.
We've got one for Andy come in. Thanks, Jim. We've got a few questions coming in. A couple of them are crackers, so we'll try and get into them. But one for Andy is Claire Vickery from Ireland. Did you ever find an aversion or mistrust of your play and experimentation process when working with clients? Was there ever a client that or do you think, well, you know what we're doing, you know what we're called, but did you ever find that aversion or mistrust in,
Most clients knew exactly what they were getting. They'd seen what we'd done before. So, but obviously some jobs went completely wrong, and we had to walk away from them. Nothing ever in life goes perfectly. Yeah. But yeah, I'm trying to think of anything specific. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But yeah, it wasn't smooth sailing all the time. But yeah, most people knew what they were going to get. I mean, a lot of design companies set up a quite an aggressive stance of this is what we do, take it or leave it. And I think we were slightly more commercial than that. I think Tomato were more like that. They were more like, this is what we do, have it or don't have it. Whereas we were more like, this is what we do, but we could twist it a bit and make it a bit more commercial. We kind of treaded the boundaries of it all, really, because I didn't really show it, but we did lots of branding things, a lot of very commercial work over the years,
I mean, I think that's quite interesting where things go wrong, because quite often with these types of events, you see where it's gone right, and you sort of don't want to really own up to, we did really bad on that one. That was so bad, and maybe you learned something from it, or maybe the client was right.
Somebody sent me a little question there, a reminder. Andy Stevens, who's a great friend of mine from Graphic Thought Facility, we were once talking years ago about jobs that you didn't want to show anyone. You just did it for the money. And he said, oh yeah, well, we've got a drawer of shame. I just laughed and I said, well, we've got a plant chest full of shame. We had to do those jobs to fund the more experimental things. We were never, it never worried me. It was just a way of keeping the beast going, really. But somebody did give me a brilliant bit of advice at St. Martin's, and it wasn't a tutor, it was Phil Baines. He still is, a few years older than me. And he once said to me, Andy, just shut up and do it. And basically I was pontificating and talking about things without actually doing it. And until you do it, you just don't know. And I always think of him when I'm thinking too much about something, and then I just try and get stuck into it and see if it works.
Yeah. So this one's from Connor Edwards. For anyone, responsibility in design has been a bit of a theme tonight. What would you say is the most irresponsible thing a designer could do in terms of how you work or what you work on? So what would be the most irresponsible thing? I mean, in some ways, there's a couple of things there that, if you're trying to question things and turn things on their head, then that sense of graphic irresponsibility is something that we all maybe embrace to try and look at things differently, but there is sort of design ethics and irresponsible. I mean, earlier on today, I read in DZine, Sophie Thomas, it's not acceptable for designers to be unaware of their carbon impact of their creations. So a sense of responsibility, and like, we just want to make great looking things. I'm very aesthetics driven. But how do we measure our carbon impact? She's suggesting the time's past where you can't not accept that. But just going back to that sense of responsibility, what would you say is the most irresponsible thing a designer could do, coming from whatever perspective you want on this?
I mean, I don't want to pass judgment on other designers. I just think for myself, I have to be true to myself, and so I know there's lots of work that I could never have done, never, because I couldn't have felt, I just wouldn't, but I would never have done it because I would have felt way too uncomfortable about it, you know. But that doesn't mean that you don't tread, you know. And in terms of, it seems like a really weird compromise, but you know, when I worked for Breakthrough, they did one campaign that was sponsored by the Sun. Now, obviously, page 3, breast cancer, yeah, okay. But I went into agonies of angst about that, about whether that was, you know, which I think was understandable. I felt kind of compromised.
We did some TV commercials for army recruitment, and that was really difficult to decide whether to do it or not. And so we put it to a vote in the studio.
Yeah.
And the vote was, I think the vote was equal to do it or not do it. So I kind of had the last say in a way. And my cousin was 15 when he joined the Royal Navy back in the 70s. He was one of the last 15-year-olds to be in the armed forces. And I asked him, and he just went, "Don't be daft, of course you're doing it. The country needs protection." And in the end, we did it. But it was really, really sleepless nights trying to think, should we be doing this or not? Or, you know, and I'm not sure what I'd do now. Maybe I wouldn't do it now. I don't know.
That's a super interesting moral dilemma, isn't it? Because you can argue it the other way, definitely.
Yeah. Because I met somebody once who said to me, "Oh, those ads you did on TV made me join the army." And you think, oh, God, really? So, yeah, that was a pretty weird one.
Right. Okay, I think we've got one more. Maybe we'll finish with this one. It's quite a nice, it's moving away, or I would say moving away, theory and practice, history, are all sort of connected, but it's coming more from the history, design history, and from Daniel Chihadi for Lucian, Jim, Andy. What was the value of graphic design history in your education, and is it still valuable for today's students? So the value of, with undergraduate is often like go to the lecture theatre and then you go to the studio. Postgraduate, normally the history, the theory is kind of integrated with the practice. But what was your feelings about each of you, the impact of understanding, or the value of understanding graphic design history in your education?
It was massively important to me, but but partly because my dad was a designer, so I was kind of brought up by history of graphic design. It's quite hard to avoid it, really, but it was really exciting. I just found it really exciting. The Bauhaus to me was just, that is, how wonderful is that? It just felt, of course, utopian in many respects, although that too has its darker side in some ways. But it was really, really inspiring. Made you think things were possible.
I definitely it was massively important to me, and I think the one line you think of, you have to learn the rules before you can break them. So in understanding typography, you have to know how to do it properly, and then we would go out of our way to break them. So, but, you know, we were, yeah, fundamentally in love with the history of type. But then we tried to break it.
I think there's also something about, you know, back in the day when there were no computers and there was no, you know, letraset was banned, every piece of type had to be drawn by hand. So you spent hours drawing, you know, planting at 10 point or 18 point. And my God, did you learn something? You learned how to draw letters. And you couldn't really do that without actually understanding the years of history embedded in those things. So, you know, the form of those very early letter forms, the sort of bembos and so on, and how that then progressed, and you got your, you know, your Baskervilles and Begonis, and then, you know, got into kind of Art Nouveau lettering, much more expressive, and then on to the modernist periods, you know, Gill and sans serif and all the rest of it. I mean, that was a kind of, I mean, it wasn't learning from the books, it wasn't learning from the history books, it was learning from actually looking and drawing. I mean, I'm not discounting the rest of it because those are important. And for me, I think it was actually the whole progression of design per se, and particularly in the way it transformed in the early 20th century. And as Lucy said, the Bauhaus and all of that, and modernism, it felt a completely fundamental way of thinking about design and design history and what it kind of brought to us, particularly when we were students in the 60s. So those were really kind of dominant influences. But as I say, it was going back to the actual type form you could learn about history as well. Well, going back, first thing you had to draw was a Trajan column, for heaven's sake. So, you know, go from there.
And so there's that sense of a continuum, you know. I'm thinking of one design educator that I respect, Jeff White, who he studied at the Central, Herbert Spencer, Victor Pasmore, you know, unbelievable. And so he picked up his learning. Again, you know, Ken Briggs was there, and Garland. And so kind of that's a little bit of history before us. And then someone like Jeff at Ravensbourne, his influence over generations of students picking up, I think, on that kind of like 80s visual language. He was always absorbing from all around the world and various kind of histories that he connected to and passing that on. So I think that sense of history, we always think it's like looking back, but it's that kind of continuum of it always evolving and being sort of passed along. At in-person lectures of the past, we'd all pile out of the lecture theatre. There'd be a little bar set up outside. We'd have a drink or two. Maybe there'd be a conversation. Maybe there'd be a bit of a fight, a bit of an argument over, you know, what we held dear that someone else didn't. But also, you might get up the next day totally inspired to create something, to make something, and maybe you don't know why, but you just feel you've got to do it. I think there's something intrinsically in all of you that has that desire to engage and to make and put out visual statements. So I hopefully anyone that attended tonight will feel the same as you might have felt in the past, coming out, having a drink, having a discussion, and then actually making something yourself as a result. So thanks for the last couple of hours. Really different, interesting contrasts and insights there. Thanks for everyone that's attended. We don't know, it might just have been us 4 or 5. But if there's been someone that's looked in and found it interesting, I think that's great. So thanks for attending, those that attended. Also behind the scenes, you know, the technology is always going to be a challenge, still is, technology 2021. But thanks to Aid Mills, David Coates, Belinda McGee, Mark Peter of On Idle, and Brian Palmer, who have put together, got the Zoom package, linked it up to YouTube, fed it back into the website. So ISTD are telling in the chat, lots of viewers from all around the world. So that's really good news. I know New Zealand are quite keen to have it put on YouTube because it's 5:30 in the morning. Mind you, I attended something in New Zealand at 7:30 in the morning. We've just got to get used to that whole idea of the global context. So that's nice that people have looked in from around the world. So thanks for people in the background that put everything together to promote this event, and hopefully we can do another one. But finally, just a thanks again to our honorary fellows here tonight, Lucy, Jim, and Andy. Thanks very much for giving your time and preparing completely new presentations through a different kind of perspective. So you had to work hard for this one, and probably the odd email or two from me going, my God, how are you going to fit 50 slides into 15 minutes? And Andy saying, hey, I can do 200 in an hour. Get out of here. So I think it's worked. So thanks very, very much. And I'm going to say this is the key word for Brian to pull the plug. Hopefully see you again soon. And goodbye.